Syncrude was set up in 1975 and will begin to operate in 1985. That's the oil company which brings together the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the Government of Alberta with 3 private companies to develop the heavy oils in Alberta. The Petroleum Administration Act passed in 1975. Petrocan law was passed in July 75, and Petrocan began operations in January 76. The Petroleum Corporation's Monitoring Act passed in 1978. The Home Insulation Program of $1.4 billion introduced thereafter. The solar heating grants of $250 million introduced, and the $100 surtax on auto air conditioners. Well, those are some of the things, not all of the things, that we did following the crisis of 1973. Now, I want to deal briefly with some of the things that we've announced for the coming period. We've announced that we will try to bring the energy businesses in Canada under Canadian control within 10 years. That is reducing from 75% to 50% foreign ownership. We're putting forward a Made in Canada price, which would be based on a blend of the costs from existing oil, heavy oils, and offshore oils, to make sure that we have a price which is based on costs and not on the world price, which is dictated by OPEC. We've proposed setting up a petroleum pricing auditing agency to inquire into the practices of companies, the private companies in the field, to make sure they're not scalping us or gypping us. We would not institute the 18 cents a gallon excise tax. We would hope to achieve energy security by the expansion of Petrocan and by starting once again the negotiations that Petrocan was having with Venezuela and Mexico to bring on offshore oil into Canada. We would set up an alternate energy corporation of Canada, which would be a subsidiary of Petrocan, to deal with alternate sources of energy to oil and to petrocarbons, such as wind, sun, tides, and other alternate sources of energy. So those are some of the things that we've proposed, and I just want to spend a minute on the Conservatives' policies. With respect to Petrocan, in the last election they said they would abolish Petrocan. After the election, when that got a lot of criticism, they said they would sell the profitable part and keep the non-profitable part. That was criticized. Then they came up with a third phase of their Petrocan policy, whereby they would keep and expand Petrocan but sell shares to the public, still subject to criticism from us and others, that now that we will have an animal that will not know whether it's really its principal job is to secure energy supplies or to make a profit. They've also approved of massive gas exports to the United States without obtaining an agreement from the United States on constructing the pipeline through Canada, which would have given us a lot of jobs. They have failed to carry on with the negotiations with Mexico and Venezuela, which would have given us more secure offshore supplies. They cut out the $80 million from the Petrocan exploration budget, which we would put back again, and they delayed considerably the setting up of the Emergency Supplies Allocation Board in view of the impending shortages this winter as a result of the Iran situation. They waited until well into, I think, October or November before setting up that board to take care of emergencies. So we were given 5 minutes. I've probably gone over the 5 minutes, but it's very difficult to deal with this very important subject in a very short period of time, but maybe we can deal with it during the question period. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll now call upon Mr. Peter Blakey of the Progressive Conservatives.
Thank you. I would just like to make some rather informal remarks to put the whole discussion in some perspective. And I don't really plan to comment on the non-policy of the Liberal Party, beyond just reading one short excerpt from an article which was published by Don McGillivray in the Gazette, which is certainly no supporter of the Conservative Party, about 2 weeks ago. And it was talking really on the question of price increases. And McGillivray made the comment that while we waited for the Liberals to decide what the famous Made in Canada price would be, and now I quote, "It's worth remembering that Trudeau's policy in office consisted of sticking his head, ostrich-like, into the tar sands while conventional oil reserves ran down and world prices, at which we have to import more and more oil, ran up." What I think I'd like to do is just put a few very basic facts on the table. There are really three separate issues. in terms of energy. First of all, there's the question of what price we are going to pay for oil. The second issue is what use is going to be made of petrocan. And the third issue is what is going to be the role of the existing multinational oil companies. Now, let's just put some basic data on the table. The real question of energy in terms of self-sufficiency is a question of oil self-sufficiency. In total energy, Canada is already self-sufficient. It's a question of whether the mix is as it should be. So when we talk about energy policy, by and large, what we're talking about is oil. Secondly, in 1968, this country was a net exporter of oil. Today, we import at the rate of 50 million barrels a year. And if we were to continue the policy which was adopted for the last 5 years, we would be an importer to the extent of 200 million barrels of oil a year by 1985. So one of the things that has to be looked at is to what extent do the parties have a thrust on developing self-sufficiency in Canada? And I think it's very clear that there the Conservatives are far more concerned that Canada becomes self-sufficient. Second point, and this is just to put in perspective current oil prices in Canada. 1950, and this is a recent Statistics Canada study, took the average Canadian working man 21 minutes to earn the price of a gallon of gas. It takes him 8 minutes today. There has been a most extraordinary drop in the real cost of oil and gasoline in Canada over the last 25 years. Third, very important, put the Canadian price today in perspective with the rest of the world with which we compete. And the Liberals keep saying, no other producing nation charges as much to its own citizens as Canada. First of all, it's a lie, because Britain is totally self-sufficient in oil and charges far more than we do. But put it in perspective. We pay $1.05 a gallon. In the United States, they're paying $1.42. In England today, they're paying $2.69. In West Germany, they're paying $3.17. In France, they're paying $3.62, and in Italy, they're paying $3.75. And in every one of those countries, the tax, either direct or indirect, is massively higher than it is in Canada. And those countries are not going to permit Canada to maintain artificially its low price for much longer without retaliation, because they're countries with whom we compete. Fourth, the price which we're paying today is in fact a camouflaged and not a real price. Because in 1980, on the basis of continuing the policy of the last government, we would be paying, in the form of a subsidy to Eastern Canada, $2.7 billion, which essentially is a subsidy for the cost of imported oil. Now, that's really part of the price. As a Conservative, I'm always a believer that those people who use a product should basically be the ones who pay for it. Whereas now, in fact, all Canadian taxpayers are paying part of that massive subsidy. There is not a single energy observer in Canada who does not say that we require a sharp increase for 3 reasons. First, because the Canadian price, apparent price, is totally unrealistic. Secondly, because it's the only way you're going to start developing the real alternative resource in Canada, which is the Athabasca tar sands. And thirdly, because to a greater or lesser extent, it will encourage conservation. Fifth, oil coming out of the tar sands, and that's where we will become self-sufficient, costs $25 a barrel to produce. We're now selling it to the Americans at $32 a barrel. We have to find the money somewhere to fund the creation of more tar sands plants. That was not done during the past 6 years. Next fact, very important. In 1973, OPEC increased its prices. West Germany and Japan adjusted immediately to those higher prices. The Liberals pretend, as Warren does today, that Canada needs a lollipop. But what's happened? West Germany and Japan, against those countries, our currency is devalued by about 60% since 1973. Why? Because they had the guts to live in the real world, because they had the guts to get cracking at solving some very fundamental economic problems, which we've just put under the shelf, which we swept under the rug, and as Don McGillivray said, we put our heads into the sand. We're telling you what the price increase is going to be, and in my opinion, the other parties would in fact have to increase the price by a similar amount. The excise tax of 18 cents a gallon is partly designed to provide an energy tax credit to lower income Canadians. 6 of the 18 cents goes to that. The 12 cents is designed in the short term to fund the subsidy for imported oil. The basic question you have to ask is, how long is this country going to remain dependent on foreign oil sources? And quite frankly, I'm not prepared to remain dependent for very long, and the Conservative policy is designed to try to eliminate that dependence as quickly as possible. The other parties do not. Petrocan, very briefly, I disagreed openly with the policy of the Conservative Party last spring. I thought it was wrong. I thought, as in most cases, the policy of the Liberal Party was dishonest. I think that the Liberal policy today continues to be dishonest. As far as the NDP on Petrocan, they have a particular view of what it should be used for. It is internally consistent. I disagree with it very violently. I do not want to be totally independent on a single source importer, because what happens when the people employed by it decide that they're going to go on strike in January? And we all know what the NDP feels about public service strikes, and it's not quite the same as what I feel. In terms of the multinationals, there's always a tendency to confuse the issues. First of all, oil company profits on any financial analysis basis are not that high, and they're not out of line. In absolute terms, they sound stupendous. Exxon has profits of $4.3 billion. Staggering. It's less than 5% of sales. I have dozens of clients who have better profit performance than the big multinationals. The key there is to say, all right, what are we going to do to ensure that they are controlled? And that's not a question of how you deal with price. It's a question of dealing with completely separate issues. But basically, I think we've got to keep some of those fundamental facts in mind. And in terms of specific policy issues, I'd rather deal with those in questions and keep the basic data on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. I'll now call upon Dave Garon of Concordia and the NDP.
Thank you. It seems Mr. Allman and Mr. Blakey have come here together to apologize for their respective policies over the past few years. I came here to address the issue of what Canada's energy policy for the future should be, and that's what I'm going to do. The first thing I'm going to do is confirm that there's every reason to believe the rumor that 8 Petro-Canada executives have been hiding out from Tory headhunters in the broadband campaign plane since late December. Petrocan is the central element in NDP energy policy. The national oil company was established during the last Liberal minority government as a result of our pressure. It's now worth some $3.4 billion. Petrocan has accelerated oil and gas exploration in the far north and along the Atlantic coast. The national oil company has furthered plans for a pipeline from the gas fields of the west to Quebec and has stimulated efforts to exploit heavy oil, as well as engaging in many research and development projects. New Democrats believe Petrocan must be retained as a 100% Crown-owned company to protect our energy security. Petrocan must expand into wholesaling and retailing of gasoline, so every penny of profit will stay in Canada. Independent retailers will have their supplies guaranteed by a wholesaler committed to fuel availability. As we conceive it, Petrocan will provide a window on price operations and protect Canadian interests in an industry dominated by foreign corporations. It will undertake frontier and offshore energy exploration to ensure energy security and eliminate the giveaway called the Frontier Exploration Tax Allowance. In addition to maintaining substantial oil reserves in eastern Canada to forestall the effects of embargoes and shortages, Petrocan must become the sole importer of oil. Tories and Liberals have rejected this proposal, despite the fact that the multinationals have been cutting back on supplies of oil destined for our shores. Our national oil company is the only guarantee that oil and gas development will take place under Canadian control at a fair price, a particularly important issue apropos the tar sands and heavy oil projects. Foreign corporations want guaranteed OPEC-level prices and tax subsidies before they get into production. Petrocan can do the job at a price Canadians can afford. Petrocan should also negotiate energy agreements on a state-to-state basis, so Canadians will get the industrial and technical spin-offs offered by energy resource development and the new jobs in engineering and the sciences. Natural gas is one of the few bright hopes on the dismal energy horizon of 1980. But on December 6th, Joe Clark announced the sale of some 3.75 trillion cubic feet of Western gas to the U.S. This decision came after the National Energy Board had predicted that serious oil shortages were probable in this decade and gas shortages likely in the 90s. Higher retail prices for gas financed the exploration, which provided us with these moderate reserves. Why ship them away to a foreign country? There is no such thing as a surplus non-renewable resource. Supposedly, profits accruing from the sale will encourage exploration and improve a poor balance of payment situation. One wonders if it's closer to reality to say that Ottawa is bending to industry pressure and to Lougheed, greedy for more oil, for more royalties. And in the resultant future shortages, the industry will demand inflated prices for that gas. We could plan the use of this gas to bring maximum benefit home to Canadians. We could extend a gas pipeline to the Maritimes to lessen their dependence on foreign oil. We could use the gas in the creation of a petrochemical industry to end an annual trade deficit of $1.5 billion in that sector, not to mention the jobs which would be created. New Democrats are committed to realizing those goals. One of the great hopes of the petroleum industry is heavy oil extraction. Imperial Oil and Shell have spent the past few years lobbying in Edmonton to get their multi-billion-dollar projects off the ground. Over $12 billion will be spent by 1986 on 2 projects in the Cold Lake region of Alberta. Ultimate output is estimated at 280,000 barrels a day. Such enormous expenditures will cause severe social dislocation in Alberta, and the thousands of temporary workers will distort the need for services and facilities in that province. ESSO, in response to such criticism in public hearings, has made some interesting political connections. Their PR man at Cold Lake left for 2 years to become national director of the Progressive Conservative Party. And Donald Lougheed, that's Premier Peter's brother, is a senior VP at Imperial Oil. With a policy directed towards energy security and conservation, such development would be controlled by Petrocan and would probably not take place for several years. One way to solve the oil problem is to reduce demand. And Alberta environmental researcher William Ross has stated that we can retrofit every oil-burning home in Canada to heat with other forms of energy for about $4 billion. This reduction in consumption would amount to 140,000 barrels daily, an amount it would cost Shell or Imperial $6 billion to extract from the heavy oil field at Cold Lake. Canadians would pay for that excess cost, and we won't have the new oil later when we need it. Research into and development of alternative energy sources, excluding nuclear power, has been tragically inadequate in Canada. The NDP would undertake policies to encourage the development of solar energy, biomass, wind power, and tidal power. Nuclear power is too risky and far too capital intensive to be a real alternative, and yet successive Liberal and Tory governments have fostered its development. Our position was clearly enunciated at the last convention. We want a moratorium and a full public inquiry. Decentralized power generation, which makes use of smaller sites previously neglected by governments in search of James Bay glory, is an important part of the solution to the energy problem. So are energy systems combining a variety of local sources and designed to meet the needs of a specific dwelling or factory. There are jobs in such an approach, jobs for the semi-skilled worker and the graduate engineer. Public transit expansion and transport planning are yet another method of conserving fuel. Legislative initiatives must continue to be taken to render the private automobile more efficient. Research into energy-saving devices is most important and also much neglected. The NDP has already committed itself to the establishment of more exacting insulation standards for new buildings and the creation of a fund for the improvement of older homes in this area. New Democrats recognize the need for immediate planning in the energy sector to avoid otherwise inevitable crises in the next 20 years. We can't allow profits to be the controlling factor in a sector of the economy so critical to our daily survival. Government must take control of the situation in the interests of all Canadians. The New Democratic Party has the will to do the job.
I think that I will allow the speakers to interact for a short time to each other, and then I'm taking the prerogative of the chair and I'm asking a question to each of them, and then we will throw the discussion open to the total audience. I would ask you not to make speeches. I think we're here to listen to the energy policies of the alternatives or some of the alternative parties that we may vote for. And so ask your questions as crisply as you can. So I would now go back again, and let's start at the far end and go back the other way. And David Garon, would you have anything to add in the way of response? I suppose it was incorporated in your talk.
To a certain extent, yes, Dr. Allman. But I would like to make a point with Mr. Blakey. He mentions that supposedly there's been a drop in the real proportion of incomes spent on energy in the past 30 years. I have statistics which show that the average Canadian is spending quite a bit more of his income on that. And not only is he spending more, but there's a differential depending on how high your income is. Energy price increases have a tendency to be regressive. For example, I think that it's about 8% of any income below $15,000 a year which is being spent on energy, whereas anyone making $25,000 and over is spending about 5.7%. The thing is also, when you make more money, it's easier to get a hold of items that are less likely to consume large amounts of energy, and it's easier to afford to convert your home.
Thank you. Mr. Blakey?
I mean, I would make a couple of comments on that. In terms of the gross percentage of people's budget which is spent on energy, to say I have statistics without talking about them and their source is, well, it's sort of the Hegelian shell game. It's the kind of thing one does in a student mock parliament, not in the real world. One of the reasons why it may be that people spend more of their total budget on energy is that in 1951, not everybody had a car, and not that many people had 2 cars, and not that many families had 3 cars, which is the case for a great many people today. Let's talk about the regressiveness of increases. Obviously, there is an element of that in increases. One of the interesting features, I think, about the concept of the excise tax combined with the energy tax credit is that for the moderate income Canadian family, there will be a net benefit. Someone, for example, who drives a car 10,000 miles a year, which is about average, is going to spend an extra $90 a year paying for that 18 cents excise tax, assuming 20 miles to the gallon, which again is, I think, a reasonable average, and you can work it out if you want to do the arithmetic. If that's a family of 4, they're going to get an energy tax credit in the second year when the program is fully implemented of $220. So that for that low-income family, there is a net benefit to the extent of $130 a year. The fact is that when you combine the excise tax and the energy tax credit, you eliminate, to a large extent, the regressive aspect of the tax itself, because any direct tax of that kind obviously has certain regressive elements. But in terms of the tax standing in isolation, you can't look at it that way. And there's no question that energy costs have fallen and are dramatically low in this country. And the real issue before us is, are we mature enough as a nation? Are we adult enough as a nation to face up to that fact? Or are we going to try and fool ourselves once again? It's interesting, there's an article in The Economist, which is a well-known British publication, where the statement is made quite bluntly. Any internationally mature Canadian will vote for the candidate who is least in favor of artificially holding down energy prices in this country. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of argument which suggests that the OPEC increases in 73, 74 were very advantageous, because what's happened is that they have permitted the development of a lot of reserves which were totally uneconomic before. I mean, at the kinds of prices we were paying in the early 70s, you'd never develop the tar sands, neither Petrocan nor anybody else.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Warren Allman, please.
Well, Fred, since I went first, I have several points that I want to rebut Mr. Blakey's remarks and Mr. Garon's. First of all, Mr. Blakey says that his party believes in self-sufficiency and ours doesn't, and that's why something has to be done about the tar sands. But in fact, the work that has started on the tar sands started under Liberal governments. Syncrude was set up under a Liberal government. There are now 3 companies working in the West on the tar sands, all set up during Liberal regimes: the Great Canada Oil Sands, Syncrude, and the Cold Lake Project. And how he can pretend, and conservatives can pretend, that this will only start or really only get going when they come to power, or when they return to power, is a lot of nonsense. As I mentioned to you in my remarks, they expect Syncrude to be in operation by 1985 because it started a few years ago. It's not something that started last spring. The other thing he says they believe in self-sufficiency, yet they're willing, it seems, maybe not Mr. Blakey, because he says he disagrees with the conservative policy on Petrocan.
No, I said I disagreed with it in the last
year.
campaign. I think the plan as it now stands
Well, in any
is
case,
basically...
they believe in
No,
self...
wait till I finish. Wait till I finish.
Well, I thought this
I
was
think the
my
plan
time.
is now a good one. Well, don't distort what I say.
Well,
But,
I'm
Mr.
talking
Blake,
about the Conservative Party. They believe in self-sufficiency, but they're willing to to depend on the multinationals for that self-sufficiency, and not our Canadian company, Petrocan. And even in the present policy with respect to Petrocan, as I said before, it's not clear whether their basic goal is profits or self-sufficiency. We want it to be a Crown corporation whose goal will be self-sufficiency. So, I mean, I think, Peter, you were distorting our policies. You talk about, you mentioned Don McGilvray. I don't think he's any more of an expert than I am. These columnists that pose as experts in the newspapers of Canada, I wish they'd run for office sometime and take responsibility for things. And also this big lie about the non-policy. I hear it everywhere I go from the Conservatives, the non-policy of the Liberals.
You hear it from the NDP too, Mr. Ryan.
Yeah, well, I've just stated about 10 policies of the party, things that we've already done and are underway, and things that we plan to do. As a matter of fact, what you said, Mr. Garon, many things that you said were things that I already said as a Liberal.
Thank you for adopting our policy.
Yeah, well, they talk about Petrocan. The NDP keep on saying that Petrocan was set up because of pressure from the NDP. What they forget was that the Petrocan bill was passed in 1975, after the minority government. And as I said, went into operation in 76. That, again, is another distortion of policy. Also, it was interesting, Peter Blakey said, I believe that those who use a resource should pay for it. Well, there's a contradiction for the Conservatives. When Otto Lang said that with respect to transportation policy, the Conservatives said, oh no, the user should not pay. There should be a subsidy in transportation policy. As a matter of fact, I think there should be a subsidy as well in... that's one thing that I didn't agree with Mr. Lang with, and we dropped that policy, but I don't think in oil that the user should always pay too, because the burden falls too heavier on the middle and lower incomes. And he compares Canada with other countries. He says, England, they're paying such a price. In Europe, they're paying such a price. But I don't think you can compare Canada and some of those European countries. The topography, the space in Canada, the climate, whereas a bicycle may be much more practical in Holland, where the population, where it's a very flat country and the people live in very close proximity. It's to suggest that Canadian farmers and people in northern Ontario and throughout Canada, in some places...
The prairies are flat.
That we should, use other sources of transportation and energy, including, I suppose, these little vehicles and so on, I think is ridiculous. You just can't compare them. And again, to say that other countries won't tolerate our lower prices. I mean, again, what Mr. Blakey is saying is that we should follow the world price, not a price that's based on our cost, but should follow world price because our trading partners will more or less like it or think or approve of it. I think if we've got a resource in this country, oil, coal, gas, solar energy, water, hydropower, we should use it. And if we can lower our costs in international trade, we should use it and beat our trading partners at it. Finally, the tax credit. On our calculations, first of all, the tax credit is only to be phased in over a 2-year period. It's $80 per adult and $30 per child. It would come to about $200 and some after 2 years. But we calculate that the oil price increases and the 18 cents excise tax would give in Quebec a bill of $306 extra for gas for automobiles in 1981 and $422 extra in 1982. So Peter says you calculated. I suggest you do calculate it. I know that at a debate I was at Vanier College the other day when the Conservative candidate said the same thing as Mr. Blakey, one of the students had calculated for herself, and it came out much more than the Conservatives had said it will, and she won't get that tax credit, and it will be for a while, and it'll be much lower than what she has to pay.
Thank you. Again, I, with your indulgence, and I'm not going to ask for a referendum, I'm going to, very quickly, I think what the consumer is vitally interested in, particularly if you're a consumer of gasoline or heating oil, I think all of us would find it difficult to live without heat in this weather. we want to know, under the government, assuming that one of these three or two of the three form the government after February the 18th, I think we'd like to know as clearly as possible what the price of these critical commodities would be. I think that's a fair question to ask each of the candidates. So would you like to undertake an answer to that, Mr. Garon, Mr. Blakey, and Mr. Allman?
Thank you. We oppose the government, the Conservative government, on its proposed oil price increase. We will oppose any price increases which are not made in connection with a large-scale conservation program and decent energy policy planning. That's been our position for many years, and it will continue to be our position as long as the Liberals and Conservatives want to do a one-sided trip on this whole problem. One thing that we would like to remind our friends over here of is the fact that we're going to run out of oil sooner or later, and it's high time we got off our dependency on oil. The Conservatives are very fond of talking about big energy projects which are all built around oil. The Liberals talk about oil constantly. Oil is not the future in this country. There are other sources of energy which are going to have to be the future, and I want to hear what they're going to do about it. All they talk about is oil. I'd also like to point out that when Mr. Allman was talking about alternatives just now, he failed to mention nuclear. Now, nuclear underwent its greatest stage of development under a series of liberal federal governments. I'd like to see them explain that.
Mr. Moderator, it's rather obvious that the candidate didn't understand the question. Perhaps you could repeat it. I mean, the question was quite a simple one. What would the price of oil be if your party came to power? Now, we've had one non-answer.
May I have an opportunity to answer that, Mr. Nolan?
Yes. That was the question.
Okay. Yes. I'd like to point out that in the New Democratic Party, we haven't put a dollar figure on the oil price increase. We recognize the need for the increase, but the increase must be balanced against the conservation program, which in itself is anti-inflationary. It has to be balanced against tax subsidies for the people who are going to be hit hardest by the increases. It's got to be balanced with a better public transportation program. It's not that simple. These two fellows seem to think it is. They can just jack up the price of oil and solve everything. It isn't that simple. And we do not intend, certainly we do not intend to raise it as quickly as the Tories do. $4 this year per barrel and $4.50 a year for 3 years thereafter is a bit much in our estimation. It's not related to Canadian needs, that pricing policy.
Could I suggest to the audience that if they feel that the answers have not been explicit or they are unsatisfactory, anybody's answer, that can be pursued in the dialogue. Mr. Allman.
Okay, Frank, Mr. Allman. This is my turn. What we have proposed is a pricing formula under which the price would be based on the costs of the conventional oil that is now in existence in Canada. The cost of that oil, which would be much lower. The cost of the non-conventional oils that are being developed in the heavy oils area, and the imported oil. And we blend the costs of those three sources together and come up with a price. We cannot give you an exact price today because we don't know the exact costs. When you're in government and you have privy to that information, you know the exact costs. But our formula is based on costs within Canada and not on the supply and demand of the world market, the OPEC price, whereas I believe the Conservatives' policy is. Peter kept referring to what the other countries would expect of us, to live in the reality of the international world. We don't believe that the price should be fixed in that way. We have put forward a formula which will give us a price, but I can't give you the exact price because it's based on cost factors which we don't have at hand and which could change from time to time. But if you do use those costs and use that blending formula, you will get a price much lower than the price proposed by the Conservatives because they are selling, they wish to sell, they haven't got away with it yet, the already existing conventional oil in Canada at the world price. That's what Lougheed wants, and that's the problem with the agreement between Lougheed and Clark. You know, just to complete this, it gets a bit upsetting to continually listen to the NDP candidate saying we haven't said this and we haven't said that, and we've said it many times. He said we haven't said anything about alternative sources. I mentioned in my remarks that we've been putting money into solar energy, into alternate sources for the last 3 or 4 years. I also mentioned in my remarks our proposal for an alternate energy corporation, which would be a subsidiary of Petro-Canada, to explore that whole area. So, I wish that, and the NDP and that, they do it over and over again with this kind of a holier-than-thou attitude, would listen to what we say. When we say something, accept it. I accept what you say.
Mr. Allman.
I would ask the other speakers not at this point to respond, but to take the opportunity to respond if they wish through the questioning. I would like to pose the second small question. Before the
Am I not given a chance to respond to the first question?
I think I simply assumed, Mr. Blakey, that you had made it, and your party had made it clear what your policy and pricing
we've made
was.
it absolutely clear.
If you'd like to repeat it, but all I'm asking you is to give the answer to the pricing, not to enter into the debate at this moment.
Whoa! I mean, you had 5 minutes of baffle gab from my left. You had 5 minutes of baffle gab from my right. I think I'm in baffle gab from the center. I think I'm entitled to at least 30 seconds to answer the question.
Yes, you certainly are.
I figure in most cases when the odds are 10 to 1 against me, they're about even.
And a Tory can put more baffle gab in 30 seconds than we can in 5 minutes.
That's true. Private enterprise is much more efficient. First of all, I want to correct a statement which Warren has made and which a number of Liberals have made, and I want there to be no understanding. The Conservative policy is to raise the price to 85% of the lower of the Chicago composite price or the international price. Basically, that keeps us way below world levels, way below world levels. And if there's anybody in this room who doesn't feel Canadians are competent enough to function with a 15% advantage opposite the Americans, then I can only say that I have more confidence. Now, what do we say the price should...
Have you reached an agreement with Lockheed on that?
Let me finish. Well, let me just comment on that. Anybody in this room who thinks that if the Liberals are elected, with virtually no representation from the West and certainly none from Alberta, anybody who thinks that party has a better chance of negotiating some kind of an agreement with Peter Lougheed than the Conservatives is a damn fool.
We had one.
I'd like to...
quite simply a damn fool. Now,
please, Mr. Blakey.
I didn't interrupt Warren when he made his speech.
Right.
Let me answer the question.
You did interrupt once, Mr. Blakey.
Let me answer the question.
That's acceptable.
The Conservative price...
That's the trouble with lawyers. I'll interrupt.
The price is going to be increased by $4 a barrel this year. It's going to be increased by $4.50 a barrel in each of the next 2 years. That will take it to the target of approximately 85% of the Chicago price. And frankly, I think it's incumbent on anybody who is thinking of supporting either the Liberals or the NDP, first of all to say, all right, if you get in there and your party actually proposes a price increase which is not substantially lower than the Conservatives, are you prepared to resign? And make sure that you get that pledge on a direct and indirect basis. Not in a hidden tax, but make sure you get that kind of pledge. Because, in fact, the price has to go up, and all the parties have to do it. There's a difference. We say openly, that's what it's got to be. And I defy Warren to even tell us what his formula is, let alone his price.
I didn't want this to become a debate simply among the speakers, so the only other point I'd like to make is this, is that before the present Parliament was dissolved and an election called, the PCs had established a parliamentary commission to inquire into Canadian nuclear issues and policies. The NDP are on record as supporting some kind of inquiry. I would simply, and we know those positions have not changed because Mr. Garon stated that categorically in his contribution. I simply want to hear a yes from Mr. Blakey that that commission, if a new government were formed by the PCs, would still be reinstated, yes or no? And I'd like to hear from Mr. Allman, and then I will throw it open to the...
I mean, the answer is yes.
Yeah, by the way, Fred, the committee had not been set up. The motion to set it up
Right, that's
was
true.
before the House, but had
Correct,
not,
that's true. It
had not
hadn't
yet
actually been
put-
voted on.
Had not been put to the House for agreement, but my understanding is that all three major parties were going to support the motion. I have the motion here. If it wasn't so long, I'd read it because
That's
it's a
fine.
very interesting
That's
motion.
fine. So the Liberals were, as I understand then, and the audience understands,
We were all
were
going to support
prepared
it.
to support the motion to create a, that's my watch telling me that it's time for the audience to get involved. I now call upon the audience to freely ask questions. I beg you not to make speeches, but to ask your questions directly. Direct them to one or all if you wish. There are microphones at the top of the stairs at each end, and you may proceed from there. First speaker, please.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to direct a couple of questions at some of the things you stated, Mr. Allman. The first one was, don't you think that perhaps Otto Lang's transport policy that there should be federal subsidies is a little biased, as we can see from his own record of using government jets for perhaps personal or not official business?
If you want to discuss that, I will. I raised this subject because Peter Blakey said he wanted an oil policy that would reduce subsidies because he believed in a policy where the user should pay. I just wanted to point out to this audience that that's completely the opposite policy that the Conservatives took with respect to transportation policy in Canada. When the Liberals were going to re-examine the Crow's Nest Pass rates and the rates for supporting the transportation of wheat in the West, the Conservatives said they would oppose that because they were opposed to a user-pay policy. Today, Peter appeared to be saying he was for a user-pay policy. Now, if you want me to discuss Otto Lang's using government aircraft, which is a completely different
I don't think
subject,
that's appropriate.
I will do it with you, but it's up
It
to
is an
you.
energy issue, mind you, but I don't think it's that
Well,
appropriate.
That's the reason I raised that. There was a contradiction in what he said, and I wanted to put it out.
Okay, I'd like to just direct two more questions, one to each of the others.
Certainly.
Mr. Garon, do you understand perhaps the NEB's decision for the sales of natural gas in the United States, that they were based upon half of our surplus after our 25-year supplies were guaranteed? Do you understand that?
The formula, you mean?
And yes, the formula for
The export formula.
And I've heard Mr. Broadbent say that we prefer to have this natural gas shipped out east or whatever to do with it. Why does the NDP so vehemently disagree with the decision of the NEB on the natural gas exports?
Mr. Garon.
Well, as I stated earlier, we do not believe there is such a thing as a surplus non-renewable resource. There is no surplus of gas. The demand in Canada will reach supply eventually. We can't afford to sell that gas because in maybe 50, maybe 75 years, we're going to be dying for that gas. We need it. And if the Americans need gas, let them spend the money to find it.
Are you saying that the NEB cannot adequately forecast our needs?
Oh, they may have correctly forecasted it, but the NEB is not reflecting our priorities, that's for sure.
Okay, now Mr. Blakey, I'd just like to know directly the oil increases in Canada, how would they affect our inflation rate?
They're obviously going to have some effect. It's very hard to tell exactly what it would be. I think the calculation is that a $1 increase in price at the wellhead represents a 4-cent increase at the pump. Now, the real question, though, is are you going to try to attack inflation or any other problem by maintaining prices artificially low, or are you going to try to resolve those problems directly? I happen to believe that you should try to face problems directly, as I indicated earlier other countries did. But there's no question that there will be at least a nominal effect on the inflation rate if we take no other steps to deal with some of the more fundamental issues in the economy.
I just made a very, very quick calculation, and that means that 2 years down the line, gasoline would be $1.78 a gallon.
That's quite possible.
Next speaker.
Okay.
I will alternate from left to right in the spirit of equitability.
Okay, my question is directed to Warren Allman, and in particular, it's something we haven't heard anything about. Okay, you stated in your short 5-minute introduction that the Liberal policy is a just and equitable price in oil pricing. But one thing we haven't heard about at all is the uranium cartel, which Canada, Australia, and South Africa were a part of. We were our own little OPEC in uranium. What is your party's feelings on that?
Well, when I was the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, I directed the Director of Investigation under the Combines Act to investigate that alleged cartel, and that investigation is presently going on. By the way, that was the first time in the history of the Combines Investigation Act that a minister had directed the Director of Investigation to carry out such an investigation. We did that because we did not feel it was a cartel, but because we wanted it to be, not only did we want to say that as a government, but we wanted an independent body to say that. Or we felt that for credibility's sake, we should put that in the hands of an independent investigation with an independent decision. We referred that for investigation under the Combines Act. The Combines Act outlaws cartels in many respects, and we'll await their decision.
Well, one thing, don't you think that act has no teeth? Because it seems from the history of the Combines Act, I know there's a proposal now to make some major changes to give that act some power, because it is pretty powerless at the moment.
You're quite correct, but it's not powerless in that respect. I was the minister that put forward the bill to give it some teeth, and the Conservatives completely opposed it and said they would not reintroduce it.
Okay, another question
And since they're in power, they have not reintroduced it. As a matter of fact, Sink Stevens said that reform and competition policy is a very low priority with the Conservative government. I don't know if he speaks for the entire government or not, but that's what he said.
Okay, another question concerning your stand on oil equalization payments. Right now, the balance of trade deficit in Canada is very high, and two of the main reasons, well, as we know, one is oil and the equalization payments, and the other is tourism.
The other is what? Excuse me?
Tourism is a major balance of trade deficit. We all like the sun in Florida, but anyway. My question being in particular is, your party seems to want to still give some support to this, and I think I agree on the Peter Blakey stand that Canada has to pay a true price for our oil, and if we're going to remain competitive in the world environment, which it seems we are not at the moment, and one reason being is the unrealistic oil pricing, but you seem to support the stand to give equalization. Could you elaborate?
Yes, well, both you and Mr. Blakey, when you talk about a real price, by that you mean a price that is somewhat near the world price, even if it's 85% lower than the world price. But the standard, the mark that you're aiming at, when you talk about a real price, is what the market is stating as the real price internationally. And when he talks about an artificial price, he talks about a price that we say should be based on costs. Now, I reject his description of the price based on Canadian costs, real Canadian costs, as an artificial price. If we can keep costs down in Canada and produce oil at a certain price, we should sell it at that price to Canadians, and that's not an artificial price. If the oil cartel, OPEC, wants to sell their price at an inflated price, and I mentioned the price, it was $2.20 a barrel in 1973, and costs didn't go up by over 400%, they artificially increased that price. That's the artificial price. The one that the standard that he's moving to within 85% of, that's the artificial price because it's been inflated for political reasons alone. I say the real price is the price based on costs within Canada. And that's what we want to base our price on.
But it seems you're missing one important point here. Can I elaborate? Just one thing. Okay, studies have been done that, okay, Canada right now, we're a net importer of oil, and studies have been done that in order for the tar sands to be economically feasible to develop, the cost of oil has only now reached that price of around $30 a barrel.
But that's if you let the multinationals develop it. If they don't want to develop it at a reasonable price, then we'll put Petrocan in, which it's doubtful that they will do. We've already started the development of the tar sands. We've started on the road to self-sufficiency. When I mentioned Syncrude, Great Canada Oil Sands, the Coal Lake projects, we've also given a lot of assistance to the projects off Newfoundland and other projects. We say to the multinationals, if you want to do it in a reasonable way, fine. But if you don't want to do it in a reasonable way, if we're going to have to pay you off all the time and dangle carrots in front of you continually, then we'll do it through Petrocan.
Mr. Allman, could I just...
fine, thank you.
It's just an arithmetic correction. The ratio of the price before 1973 and today's price is 1,400%. 225 as opposed to...
220 to $32.
Yeah, that's about 1,400%.
Well, that's artificial.
I would like to comment. I would like to
It's an
comment on
artificial
that.
increase.
Yes.
I would like to comment on Warren's answer, because it seems to me the key issue you, as consumers 10, 15, 20 years down the road, have to keep in mind is that the cost that you're talking about in terms of Canada's future oil requirements is the cost of tar sands oil. And the basic production cost today is running at about $25 a barrel. And anybody who tries to suggest that Petrocan is going to do it infinitely more cheaply and efficiently than anybody else is just pulling the wool over your eyes.
Not infinitely more.
The basic cost is $25 a barrel. I mean, that's the hard reality. That is essentially higher than the current price. Well, with the last $2 a barrel increase, it's about the same as a number of the OPEC countries are selling their oil at. So that's the cost figure which you have to keep in mind. And those are the costs that we're going to pay over the years unless we can improve the technology in some dramatic fashion.
And that price, incidentally, and this would apply to all the houses we have on Milet, doesn't include the social and environmental costs, which are not priced at all.
Fair enough. That's the direct cost.
Dr. Nelman, could I comment on that too?
Who asked for it?
Over here.
Yes, certainly, of course, Mr. Garon. I'm hearing other voices in other rooms.
The two gentlemen on my right keep coming back to the tar sands and heavy oil as the solution to Canada's oil problems and energy problems. And they are not the solution. The point is that if consumption increases at its current rate, which is 3.5% per annum, we'll have to double our oil production in this country by 1999. We can't do that. The point is we've got to reduce the demand. If we can reduce it to 1%, it gives us an extra 50 years. So what are these people doing about conservation programs to save the oil for the future? All they're talking about is producing more so we can keep consuming it at the same profligate rate.
That's an inaccurate description of both party policies, as a matter of fact.
Very inaccurate.
It doesn't represent either the Liberal Party or the PC Party position.
Would you explain your policy on conservation and exactly how many billions of dollars you've allotted for it?
Let's face it, both the parties are taking very much the same sort of position on alternative energy sources as you are, except interestingly enough, and I think I speak for the Liberals as well, we think that we should proceed to continue investigating the possibility of nuclear energy, which you apparently oppose and your party opposes. Well, fine, you're entitled to oppose it. It's a perfectly legitimate position. I happen to support the continued research. You oppose it.
We
Fair
all
enough.
we like living.
But just a sec. You can't have it both ways. You can't take the easy way out every time. You're going to cut demand, but you're not going to raise price. What are you going to do, David? You're going to ration?
We are going to raise prices. I've never denied that we're going to raise prices. But we have to tie every price increase to rational policy and conservation. Without those two elements, a price increase is just inflationary. It has no other impact. Chrysler of Canada and GM both reported in Maclean's last summer that the demand for large-size model cars continues as it did before. There's been no significant change in the past 2 or 3 years in spite of the price increases.
Americans have done it
Mr.
by
Garon,
raising price.
Mr. Garon, I mentioned to you several times, and you keep on ignoring that before the election of last May, we already had a policy in place, and we had been spending quite a bit of money to assist alternate sources of energy, and that, well, I mentioned for solar, it was, I forget, it was 400 million. I mentioned the figure earlier.
Pocket money.
Well,
You can't even build
that's
an
400
Olympic stadium for $400 million.
Right. Well, how much are you, well, again,
Let alone an entire
we'll get into
energy
the
program.
sweepstakes. How much is the NDP going to spend? You know, very interesting. We've had 3 NDP governments in Canada. One in Manitoba, which approved of nuclear energy, by the way. One in Saskatchewan, which still exists, and one in BC. And the NDP always takes a position out of power that they never take in power. Mr. Blakey doesn't take the same position on many of these issues that Mr. Broadbent is taking with respect to Ottawa. I'll just read you what we said about Alternative Energy Corporation as a subsidiary of Petrocan. This new Crown Corporation will assume all existing and planned federal activities relating to the research and development of wind, solar, tidal, biomass, coal liquefaction, and other energy forms. A study by Harvard University estimates that they could provide up to 20% of the American energy needs, with similar comparisons in Canada by the year 2000, and that we could save 35% in energy consumption as well by moving to these alternatives. So don't pretend that your party is standing there holier than thou than the rest of us on this issue. You're not.
How much money are you going to give them?
I can't tell you. I can't tell you how much. Well, ask the NDP how much money they're going to give them. The reason we don't know The reason you don't know, you can't tell you exact funds now, is that it depends on how much money's coming in, how good the economy is, and so on. But we're committed. We're committed to it. I can't tell you how much.
Could I ask the people who are asking questions to please go up to use the mics and ask your questions? I think that's a legitimate question. Mr. Urs Thomas.
I have been following the energy debate over the last few years of the Canadian parties as well as in foreign countries. And it seems to be more and more that the whole debate is just not being realistic. Because without even talking about it, we are taking for granted that the whole economy is based on growth of productivity in all countries. That's the case. And we don't look at what the energy side of this basic belief looks like, and what that has as a consequence for the whole society. Now, what I think is the only possible way in the long range, and that's more than 4 years, unfortunately, but that's what we have to look at, and what politicians never look enough at it sufficiently, is we have to get into a system where which is based on productivity per energy consumption. And I would like to know the three candidates what they think of it, if it's basically a good idea. I know it won't be feasible right away, but in the long run. And if it's a good idea, what they plan to do within 4 years to get towards that goal.
Look, quite frankly, I'm not sure exactly what it is you're talking about. You're obviously someone who studied the field. And if what you're saying is, should there be some kind of sanction or punishment for those who are energy wasters and some kind of reward for those who are energy conservers, I mean, in principle, I would agree with you 100%. But I'm not quite sure that that's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, what you just mentioned goes by itself, but what I'm saying is that we have to get into an economy which is based on efficiency and not on productivity, on output per energy consumption, and not on output per worker. And that's thinking not within the next 20 years. I think it is very essential that we get into that kind of thinking.
Well, I mean, as far as the thinking is concerned, I don't know whether I speak for the others. It seems to me absolutely admirable that that's a goal we should be trying to achieve. I'm not sure that any party has addressed itself, and if ours has, quite frankly, I don't pretend to be aware of it, in terms of a specific program to try to achieve that.
Could I reply to that?
I have no doubt that the NDP has a marvelous scheme to solve all that problem.
Well, okay.
Yes, well, we do have a tendency to put a little more thought into our work.
Oh.
No, I do believe, I think...
You know, there's a marvelous statement by George Orwell. There's a marvelous statement by George Orwell. Not to be a socialist at 20 is to have no soul. Not to be a conservative at 30 is to have no brains. And fortunately, David's only 23.
Well, I'd like to reply to that. I'd like to say George Orwell is dead.
In the long run,
I would also like to reply to the gentleman's question. Yes, we in the New Democratic Party recognize the fact that we believe that labor productivity has reached its ceiling and that we have to look for productivity in other sectors. In our energy policy, which I've put here, just to make sure everybody sees that we have one, we state quite categorically that we stand for higher energy efficiency standards for structures and vehicles, an education program to explain and encourage conservation, tax incentives and disincentives to industry to ensure the implementation of more efficient processes, especially in the energy-intensive industries of pulp and paper and primary metals.
an apple pie and motherhood.
Well, I really don't think that has any bearing on what we're discussing. We also stand for increased subsidization of public transportation in and between cities, and for conservation-oriented traffic control, such as bus lanes and the elimination of the one-car, one-commuter syndrome. I'd like to ask the two gentlemen on my right how they came to the debate today. I came by the subway.
Well,
I came on foot.
And how did you get to your office this morning?
I drove
my
a car.
lovely campaign truck with Peter Blakey all over the side.
That's right.
I drove my car because there's no subway up where I am. But
there are buses, Mr. Allman.
oh well, I drove my car anyway. It's a small car, though. It's a small car.
Well, I don't have a car, Mr.
I'm
Allen.
sorry that I... Well... I really
Put your
feel,
money where your
this guy's
mouth
trying to
is.
make me feel real guilty, but all the things that you mentioned as your policies are all being done now in one form or another. We've started along the road to doing those things. Every one of them, I was listening to them, are all underway. Now the question then remains is, are you going to put more money into some of them? We all would like to. Perhaps that will be done. And I think that would be admirable in answer to the question that was asked. But
So what's your reply
then? Let's not pretend that those policy proposals that you put forward are new and have not already been started, not only by the federal government, but by several of the provincial governments. As Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, we started the Inner Guide program, which was introducing energy standards for all home appliances, and we were starting off with guides to tell the consumer how much energy each appliance would burn, and that has started already with refrigerators, because they were the biggest consumers of energy in the home, and it's being extended to air conditioners, stoves, all sorts of home appliances. So a lot of that is already underway. The question is how much more resources and revenues can we put into it? We'd like to put more, of course.
Can you be more specific than Mr. Blakey, who admits at least openly that he's not going to do anything about an increased efficiency?
No, come on. That's
Well,
not what I
you
said.
said.
What I no
You said you're not even aware of the problem.
No,
I mean,
no. What I said was there are no specific concrete ABCs in the party program, and so far I haven't heard any from anybody else either.
Yeah, that's what I said. So I wonder if
enough.
Mr. Warren has anything going a bit further than that. That's practically
Those
starting from
programs
scratch.
are there. They're ongoing.
No, wait a minute. We do have that in our program. I read it earlier, and I don't want to bore everybody by reading it again, but it's very specific that we intend to move in the direction that you mentioned. We had already started it, and I was part of it before.
Would the speaker now in the red sweater like to ask that question?
Thank you. I'd like to direct this question to Mr. Allman, and perhaps Mr. Blakey would like to comment afterwards. The Canadian Petroleum Association has recently stated in the Globe and Mail that $150 billion will have to be committed to oil exploration and production to ensure energy self-sufficiency for Canada. The Science Council of Canada has stated that $2.2 billion should be committed to nuclear fuel reprocessing in this country as well. I'd like Mr. Allman to comment on what effects he thinks this commitment of capital to non-renewable resources will have in the future when a second massive infusion of capital will have to be made for non-renewable energies, or excuse me, for renewable energy. Does he feel that the country can actually afford this commitment to the two hard and soft paths at the same time? Thank you.
I would just again like to sort of interpret the thrust of the last two questions. I think are very fair. What they're saying is that there's a limit to the rate of capital formation for a particular application, such as energy development. You can't have it both ways. You can't divide the pie in more than one way, depending on the size. If you have a massive commitment of that capital formation to a particular energy source, like oil or the tar sands or the heavy oils, then you can't make an equally massive commitment to conservation and efficiency or to the renewables. And what the thrust of both questions are is asking these candidates to say, how are you going to divide the energy budget or energy pie and the allocation of those resources to these various alternatives?
I might add that those figures are consistent with the